The woman I blamed for 15 years was the only person who stayed when my world fell apart. If someone had said those words to me a few years ago, I would have laughed and walked away. My name is Helen Carter. I am 72 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed I was a good judge of character. That belief was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. The day my son Ryan introduced Sophie to our family, I decided exactly who she was before she spoke more than 10 sentences. She arrived at our house carrying a blueberry pie she had baked herself. Ryan looked happier than I had seen him in years. Sophie smiled politely and complimented my garden. Everyone else seemed charmed. I was not. Something about her bothered me immediately. Looking back, I cannot even explain why. She was respectful. She was educated. She held a steady job. She treated Ryan well. Yet I convinced myself she was wrong for him. Sometimes pride disguises itself as intuition. I did not know that then. Over the following months, I watched her carefully. Every gesture, every comment, every family gathering became another opportunity for me to confirm what I already believed. If Sophie was quiet, I called her distant. If she offered help, I assumed she wanted praise. If Ryan defended her, I told myself he was blinded by love. No matter what she did, I found a reason to criticize it. When they became engaged, I smiled for the photographs and congratulated them in front of relatives. Inside, I felt disappointment. I told myself I was protecting my son. That excuse made it easier to ignore what I was really doing. After the wedding, things only became worse. Sophie attended every holiday dinner. She remembered birthdays. She brought gifts. She volunteered whenever someone needed help moving furniture or preparing food for family events. The rest of the family appreciated her effort. I continued keeping score. Every minor mistake became evidence in my private case against her. My daughter Donna often agreed with me. Together we would exchange looks across the dinner table whenever Sophie spoke. Ryan noticed the tension but tried to keep peace between everyone. For years he stood in the middle, exhausted by a conflict he never fully understood. The strange part is that Sophie rarely argued back. I expected confrontations. I expected resentment. Instead, she remained calm. Sometimes she looked hurt. Sometimes she simply changed the subject. Her restraint annoyed me almost as much as her presence. I wanted proof that my opinion had been right from the beginning. The proof never came. 15 years passed that way. Family dinners, holidays, birthdays, quiet judgment, unspoken distance. Then one evening, I overheard Ryan thanking Sophie for something she had done for him during a difficult week at work. The gratitude in his voice surprised me. For a moment, I wondered if I had been missing something all these years. The thought disappeared almost immediately. Old beliefs are comfortable. They rarely leave without a fight. That night, as I watched Sophie help clear the dinner table while everyone else relaxed in the living room, I remember thinking the same thing I had believed since the day we met. One day she will show everyone who she really is. What I did not know was that the person about to be exposed was not Sophie. It was me. For years I believed everyone saw what I saw. That was what made the situation so dangerous. When people repeat the same opinion long enough, it begins to sound like fact. My daughter Donna certainly agreed with me. Whenever Sophie made a suggestion during family gatherings, Donna would find a reason to dismiss it. If Sophie organized a holiday dinner, Donna would point out something that could have been done better. I rarely stopped those conversations. More often, I encouraged them. Looking back now, I realize how much influence I had over the atmosphere of our family. When I expressed doubt about Sophie, others became more comfortable doing the same. Ryan noticed it, of course. More than once he asked me to give his wife a fair chance. I always responded with the same answer. I am only being honest. Honesty is a wonderful thing when it is actually honest. In my case, it had become a shield for prejudice. One Thanksgiving stands out in my memory. Sophie spent nearly 2 days preparing food for more than 20 relatives. She cooked recipes she had learned from Ryan's grandmother and even brought handwritten copies for younger family members who wanted them. Everyone complimented the meal. I remember sitting at the table thinking she was trying too hard. Instead of appreciating her effort, I searched for hidden motives. That was how my mind worked whenever it came to Sophie. Every good thing required a suspicious explanation. Ryan suffered the most from the tension. He loved his wife. He loved his family. Every holiday forced him to choose between defending Sophie and preserving peace. Many evenings ended with him quietly helping clean up while the rest of us sat talking. I often noticed Sophie helping beside him. They worked together naturally. laughing about small things while everyone else relaxed. There was a closeness between them that I never fully acknowledged because doing so would have challenged the story I had created in my head. As the years passed, Sophie continued showing up. Birthdays, anniversaries, family emergencies, school events for relatives' children, community fundraisers. She was always there. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering why someone would keep trying so hard to belong in a family that never fully welcomed her. Then I would push the thought away. It was easier to maintain old judgments than question them. One summer evening, Ryan invited the family to a backyard barbecue. The weather was perfect. Children played on the lawn. Music drifted from outdoor speakers. At one point, I watched Sophie helping my elderly neighbor carry folding chairs across the yard. She moved slowly beside the woman, making sure she was comfortable. The scene lasted less than a minute, yet it stayed with me for reasons I could not explain. There was no audience. Nobody important was watching. There was nothing for Sophie to gain. Still, she helped without hesitation. For a brief moment, doubt entered my mind again. What if I had been wrong about her? What if 15 years of certainty had been built on nothing more than my own assumptions? I wish I could say that question changed me. It did not. Instead, I ignored it. I continued believing what was familiar. I continued judging what I did not understand. Then, just a few months later, something happened that changed everything. One ordinary morning, I woke up feeling perfectly fine. By sunset, my entire life looked different. The day everything changed began like any other Tuesday. I woke up just after 6 in the morning, watered the flowers on my back patio, and made myself a cup of coffee. The weather forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures. I remember feeling grateful for an ordinary day. Looking back now, that ordinary feeling seems almost precious. Around noon, I was organizing old photographs in my living room when a wave of dizziness hit me without warning. At first, I assumed I had stood up too quickly. I sat down and waited for the feeling to pass. Instead, it grew worse. Within minutes, I felt weak, disoriented, and unable to focus clearly. The next thing I remember is sitting in an emergency room while nurses asked questions I struggled to answer. Everything happened quickly after that. Tests, monitors, conversations between medical staff. Before evening, I was admitted for observation. The doctors assured me they were being cautious, but their serious expressions made it difficult to relax. When Ryan arrived, I felt relieved. He sat beside my bed and tried to reassure me that everything would be fine. Unfortunately, his company was dealing with a major problem involving a project in another state. By the following morning, he received a call that required immediate travel. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to stay. He also knew he could not ignore the situation. "I will be back as soon as I can," he promised. I told him to go. What else could I say? Life does not pause simply because we want it to. After Ryan left, I expected Donna to visit. She called once that afternoon and promised to stop by later in the week. Then she became busy with work and family obligations. Friends sent messages. Neighbors wished me well. Everyone seemed concerned. Yet concern from a distance feels very different from presence. Late that evening, I heard a familiar voice outside my room. When Sophie walked through the doorway carrying a small bag and a worried expression, my first reaction was surprise. My second reaction was suspicion. "Ryan told me what happened," she said softly. "I wanted to check on you." She placed a few personal items on the table beside my bed. A phone charger, a clean sweater, a book she thought I might enjoy. Small, thoughtful things I had forgotten during the rush to the hospital. I thanked her politely, but part of me remained guarded. Years of distrust do not disappear overnight. Sophie stayed for nearly an hour before leaving. The next morning she returned. Then she came back again the day after that. She spoke with nurses. She brought fresh clothes from my house. She updated Ryan while he was away. Each visit challenged the story I had been telling myself for 15 years. Still, I refused to let go of that story completely. I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe she was trying to impress Ryan. Maybe she wanted recognition. Maybe she simply wanted people to notice her generosity. Yet as the days passed, one uncomfortable fact became impossible to ignore. While everyone else was living their normal lives, Sophie kept showing up, and I had absolutely no idea why. By the end of the first week, a routine had formed around my hospital room. Nurses changed shifts. Doctors reviewed test results. Visitors came and went. Through it all, one person remained surprisingly constant. Every morning, usually before 8 o'clock, Sophie appeared carrying coffee for herself and a small bag of whatever I might need that day. Sometimes it was a fresh sweater. Sometimes it was reading glasses I had forgotten at home. Once it was a framed photograph of Ryan and me from a family vacation years earlier. She noticed details that even I overlooked. Instead of feeling grateful, I found myself searching for reasons to doubt her. Old habits are difficult to abandon. Whenever Sophie spoke with a nurse, I wondered what she was saying. Whenever she offered help, I questioned her motives. One afternoon, she spent nearly 30 minutes speaking with Dr. Nathan Brooks about my treatment plan. Watching from across the room, I immediately convinced myself she was overstepping. After the doctor left, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me. Why are you so involved in all of this? Sophie looked surprised. Because I care about you. The answer sounded simple. Too simple. You do not have to pretend, I replied. For a moment, disappointment crossed her face. It vanished quickly, replaced by the same calm expression she always seemed to wear around me. I am not pretending, Helen. Then she changed the subject and asked whether I wanted anything from the cafeteria. That response bothered me more than an argument would have. If our positions had been reversed, I probably would have defended myself. Sophie never did. Days passed. Ryan remained out of state, handling work responsibilities while calling constantly to check on me. Donna visited once for less than an hour before rushing off to another commitment. Friends sent flowers. Neighbors mailed cards. Yet Sophie continued showing up every day without fail. One rainy afternoon, I woke from a nap and found her sitting quietly in the corner reading a book. She did not realize I was awake. There was no audience, no doctor watching, no family members around to witness her dedication. She was simply there, waiting in case I needed something. The sight unsettled me. It challenged everything I believed. As the second week approached, my health improved slightly, but recovery remained slow. The uncertainty weighed heavily on me. One evening, I overheard two nurses discussing how fortunate I was to have someone so attentive helping coordinate information with the medical team. One nurse assumed Sophie was my daughter. The other replied, "Whoever she is, she clearly loves that woman." Those words stayed with me long after they left the room. Love was not a word I associated with our relationship. Tolerance, perhaps. Obligation, maybe. But not love. Later that night, while Sophie gathered her things to leave, she accidentally dropped a folder. Several papers slid onto the floor. As I helped collect them, I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. One document contained my name, and what I read next made me question everything I thought I knew. The document disappeared back into the folder before I could read more than a few lines, but what I saw was enough to leave me stunned. My name appeared beside a list of expenses and payment confirmations. Sophie noticed my expression immediately. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed uncomfortable. "It is nothing important," she said gently as she gathered the papers. I nodded, but curiosity had already taken hold. After she left that evening, I could not stop thinking about what I had seen. The next morning, while Sophie was speaking with Dr. Nathan Brooks in the hallway, one of the nurses stopped by my room to review paperwork. During the conversation, she casually mentioned how fortunate I was. "Not everyone has family willing to help the way yours does," she said. I assumed she was referring to Ryan. Then she added something unexpected. "Your daughter has handled so much for you these past few years." I immediately corrected her. "Sophie is my daughter-in-law." The nurse smiled. "Well, she certainly treats you like a daughter would." After she left, those words lingered in my mind. Later that afternoon, Ryan called from out of state. We spoke about my recovery, his work situation, and the doctors. Before ending the conversation, I asked a question that surprised even me. "Has Sophie been helping with things for me before I came here?" There was a brief silence. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Anything. Bills. Appointments. Household things." Ryan sounded confused. "Mom, she has been helping for years." My grip tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about?" Another pause followed. "I thought you knew." He explained that whenever I struggled with technology, Sophie quietly handled online forms and account updates. When my roof needed emergency repairs after a storm several years earlier, Sophie spent hours coordinating contractors while I stayed with Donna. During one difficult winter, when unexpected expenses piled up, Sophie helped Ryan reorganize family finances so I would not have to worry. None of it had ever been presented as a favor. None of it had been used to earn praise. Most of it happened without my knowledge. After the call ended, I sat alone staring at the wall. Memory after memory began resurfacing. Moments I had dismissed. Problems that somehow solved themselves. Challenges that became easier without explanation. For years I had assumed those things simply worked out. Now I was learning that someone had often been working behind the scenes. That evening Sophie arrived carrying a small container of homemade soup. She looked tired. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. For the first time, I wondered how much of that exhaustion came from carrying responsibilities nobody acknowledged. As she adjusted a blanket near the foot of my bed, I studied her face carefully. The woman standing there was not asking for recognition. She was not keeping score. She was simply helping. And for the first time in 15 years, I began to feel something I never expected. Shame. But the most painful discovery was still waiting for me, and it would arrive in the form of a letter I was never supposed to see. The following week became one of the loneliest periods of my life. Although my condition slowly improved, recovery moved more slowly than anyone expected. Dr. Nathan Brooks remained optimistic, but he warned me that patience would be important. Patience had never been one of my strengths. As the days stretched on, I began noticing something uncomfortable. The list of visitors continued shrinking. Friends who called every day now called every few days. Neighbors who promised to stop by became busy with their own lives. Donna visited once and spent most of the time answering messages on her phone before leaving for another obligation. I did not blame anyone. People have responsibilities. Life moves forward. Still, the silence felt heavier with each passing day. Through all of it, Sophie remained. Some mornings she arrived before I finished breakfast. Other days she came after work carrying groceries, clean clothes, or updates from home. She never acted as though her presence deserved recognition. She simply stepped into whatever task needed to be done and handled it. One afternoon, I woke from a nap and saw her sitting beside the window reviewing paperwork. The sunlight illuminated the tired expression on her face. For the first time, I noticed how exhausted she looked. Not the exhaustion of a bad day. The exhaustion of someone carrying responsibilities for a long time. You should go home, I told her. Sophie smiled. I will. After I finish this. You are here too much. Her smile softened. You would do the same for family. The word struck me harder than she realized. Family. For 15 years I had treated her like an outsider. Yet she continued speaking as though she belonged. That evening Ryan called from his hotel room. His work situation remained complicated, and although he planned to return soon, delays kept appearing. During our conversation, he thanked Sophie repeatedly for everything she was doing. After hanging up, I found myself wondering whether I had ever thanked her for anything. The answer was difficult to face. A few days later, while Sophie stepped out to speak with a nurse, I overheard two visitors in the hallway discussing patients and families. One woman said something that stayed with me. You learn who truly cares when life becomes inconvenient. The sentence echoed in my mind for hours. My situation had certainly become inconvenient. Hospital visits required time, traffic, rearranged schedules, emotional energy. Yet Sophie continued showing up day after day. The realization forced me to confront another uncomfortable truth. The people I expected to be there were often absent. The person I expected to disappear never did. Late one evening, after most of the floor had grown quiet, Sophie helped organize a few personal belongings near my bed. While placing items into a drawer, she accidentally left behind a small notebook. I noticed it only after she had gone home. At first I intended to return it unopened. Then a folded sheet of paper slipped partially from between the pages. My name was written across the top. Curiosity overcame hesitation. As I unfolded the paper, I realized I was holding something deeply personal. And with every line I read, the weight of my past choices became harder to bear. For several minutes, I simply stared at the paper in my hands. It was not a formal letter. It looked more like something Sophie had written for herself and never intended anyone else to read. The first line alone made my chest tighten. I know Helen may never truly accept me, but I hope one day she knows I never stopped trying. I read it again, then again. The words did not sound bitter. They did not sound angry. If anything, they sounded sad. As I continued reading, Sophie described family gatherings where she felt unwelcome. She mentioned holidays when conversations suddenly changed after she entered a room. She wrote about comments that seemed harmless to others but stayed with her for days. What hurt the most was realizing she remembered moments I had long forgotten. Small dismissive remarks, cold responses, Invitations that never fully felt like invitations. The kind of things I convinced myself did not matter. Clearly, they mattered to her. Yet nowhere in the letter did she blame me. That was the part one struggled to understand. Sophie wrote that she knew I loved Ryan. She believed much of my behavior came from fear of losing my place in his life. She even wrote that becoming part of an established family was difficult and that she often wondered whether she should have tried harder herself. Reading those words felt unbearable. I had spent 15 years assuming the worst about her, and she was still looking for ways to understand me. Near the middle of the letter, one paragraph made tears form in my eyes. I cannot change how Helen feels about me. I can only decide what kind of person I want to be. Ryan loves her. She is part of his heart. That makes her part of mine too. I lowered the paper and stared out the dark hospital window. No one had ever described me that way before. Certainly not someone I had treated so unfairly. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the past from Sophie's perspective. Every family dinner, every holiday, every uncomfortable silence. She had endured all of it while continuing to show kindness. The realization was devastating. The next morning, I carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the notebook before Sophie arrived. When she walked into the room carrying coffee and her usual gentle smile, I found it difficult to meet her eyes. Guilt has a way of changing how you see people. Suddenly, I noticed every thoughtful thing she did. The way she greeted nurses by name. The way she checked whether I needed water before sitting down. The way she quietly handled problems before anyone else even noticed them. None of it felt performative. It felt natural, real. Later that afternoon, after Sophie stepped out to take a phone call, Dr. Nathan Brooks stopped by to review my progress. Before leaving, he smiled and said something simple. "You are fortunate to have her." I nodded slowly. For once, I did not argue. The truth was becoming impossible to escape. Sophie had spent years trying to earn a place in my heart, and I was finally beginning to realize how much that failure belonged to me. After reading Sophie's letter, I could no longer hide behind old excuses. Recovery gave me too much time to think, and every memory seemed different when viewed through a new lens. I began revisiting years of family gatherings one moment at a time. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner where Sophie spent days preparing food while I criticized small details. I remembered birthdays when she arrived early to help decorate and stayed late to clean. I remembered countless occasions when she offered assistance and received little more than polite distance in return. What unsettled me most was not a single dramatic event. It was the accumulation of small moments. Tiny choices, quiet judgments, repeated assumptions. None of them felt significant when they happened. Together, they created a wall between us. One afternoon, Sophie brought a photo album from my house because she thought I might enjoy looking through old family pictures. As we turned the pages, I noticed something surprising. In photograph after photograph, Sophie appeared beside family members helping organize events, carrying supplies, setting tables, holding children, or assisting elderly relatives. She had been present for so much of our family history. Yet somehow I had trained myself not to see her contributions. The realization was painful. Later that evening, Ryan called again. He sounded relieved to hear my voice growing stronger. During our conversation, I asked him a question I should have asked years earlier. Has Sophie ever complained about me? The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Finally, he answered, "No, not really." I found that difficult to believe. "Not really," I repeated. Ryan sighed softly. "She was hurt sometimes. Anyone would be. But she always told me she hoped things would improve." After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Hope. Even after 15 years, she had still hoped. The next morning, Sophie arrived carrying coffee and a small notebook where she had written down medication schedules and follow-up appointments. She reviewed everything carefully to make sure I understood the plan after discharge. Watching her speak, I suddenly realized how much responsibility she had been carrying without recognition. She was not helping because she expected gratitude. She was helping because that was who she was. For years I had searched for hidden motives. The truth was much simpler. Sophie was kind. That afternoon, Dr. Nathan Brooks informed me that I would likely be discharged within a few days if progress continued. The news should have made me happy. Instead, it filled me with anxiety. Leaving the hospital meant facing reality. It meant confronting the damage I had caused. It meant saying things I had avoided for 15 years. As evening settled outside the window, Sophie prepared to leave for the night. Before reaching the door, she turned and asked if I needed anything. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. There was so much I needed to say that the words refused to come. She smiled gently and promised to return in the morning. After she left, I stared at the empty doorway and made a decision. The next time we spoke, everything would change. Because the truth was no longer something I could avoid. It was something I finally had to admit. The next morning arrived sooner than I expected. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, memories returned. 15 years of assumptions. 15 years of distance. 15 years of opportunities one had wasted. When Sophie entered the room carrying coffee and her familiar smile, I knew I could not postpone the conversation any longer. She set her bag down and immediately began asking how I felt. Before she could finish, I asked her to sit. The concern in her expression deepened. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I finally said the words I should have said years earlier. I owe you an apology. Sophie looked surprised but remained silent. My voice trembled as I continued. I told her about the letter. I admitted that I had read it. I apologized for invading her privacy. Then I told her something even more difficult. I admitted that I had been wrong about her from the very beginning. The words felt heavy as they left my mouth. I described how I had judged her before truly knowing her. I confessed that I had questioned her motives, dismissed her kindness, and allowed my own fears to shape the way I treated her. By the time I finished speaking, tears filled my eyes. You spent years trying to be part of this family, I said quietly, and I made that harder than it ever should have been. Sophie sat quietly for a moment. Then she reached for a tissue and handed it to me. The gesture was so simple and so familiar that it nearly broke my heart. Helen, she said softly, I never wanted perfection. I only wanted a chance. Hearing those words made me realize how much pain could have been avoided if I had listened sooner. I expected anger. I expected disappointment. I expected her to tell me how deeply I had hurt her. Instead, she offered something I did not deserve. Understanding. I know you love Ryan, she said. I always knew that. I think sometimes we were both waiting for the other person to take the first step. I shook my head. No, this was my responsibility. Sophie smiled gently. Maybe, but we are here now. At that moment, Ryan walked into the room. He had finally returned. The look on his face when he saw us sitting together was something I will never forget. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no guarded expressions, no invisible wall dividing the room. When I told him everything, he listened quietly. Then he wrapped his arms around both of us. A few days later, I returned home. Recovery continued, but life felt different. Family dinners became easier. Conversations became more honest. Trust did not appear overnight, but it began growing where resentment once lived. Sometimes I still think about all the years I lost because I refused to see the truth standing directly in front of me. Yet I am grateful for the lesson. At my lowest point, when fear and uncertainty entered my life, the person I had trusted the least became the person who refused to leave. Sophie forgave me when I had done nothing to earn forgiveness. She showed me more grace than I showed her. And if there is one truth I carry with me now, it is this. The person who saved my family was never the person I feared. It was the person I failed to appreciate until she taught me what real love looks like.